I am here with Kelly Palmer. Kelly, how long have we known each other? We ran in circles back when I was an industry analyst, and you were. I think we first met when you were at LinkedIn,
I
perhaps.
think that's right. I think it
So
was when I was at LinkedIn. So I was at LinkedIn starting in 2012 to 2016. So yeah, it was somewhere in that time frame.
yeah, so it's been a little while, I'm very happy about that because you're somebody that I've followed and listened to on many a subject and learning, and I've always been fascinated with some of the things that you bring to this, and of course, one of the key things you talk about is why we're doing this podcast episode today is skills. We can't get enough of skills, and it's come up as a topic on previous podcast episodes with other guests, and everybody sort of has their own take on it, but at the core, it's really all about the skills. And so, you and I, an offline conversation, I think, determined that there's a really unique perspective on where we are with skills that I didn't hear anybody else digging into, which is really why I wanted you on the podcast so much. So, um, sort of with that broad opening of here we are talking about skills yet again, let us know sort of where we are in this whole thing from skills. Cause, like I said, you've seen it from a lot of different perspectives, right? From, the corporate enterprise side, from the learning technology provider side, now from the higher ed side. So you sort of got the 360 view.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'd love to talk about that too, because even in my early days at LinkedIn, interestingly enough, I would say LinkedIn kind of started talking about skills before anyone else. And you remember that when I was there, we introduced that idea of endorse people for skills. And
Yes.
this wasn't very learning scientific, but it was how do we talk about skills to the average consumer. And I like that in so many ways, because oftentimes in learning we get a little too nerded out about what is a skill and what is a competency. And LinkedIn just had to make a call just on how the consumer might think about skills. Now, I would argue that they also missed an opportunity to really be the place where you could endorse skills, because when they launched that feature, they actually let anybody endorse anyone for any skill, and we got a lot of pushback on that. Now it's a little more. Now they check to see if people really want to have somebody else endorse them for a skill. But I think that kind of started part of the conversation about why skills are important, and you're thinking about your resume or your LinkedIn profile and what skills do I have. And so that's when I really started thinking about it a lot. And then I think also my work, I did move to actually, I want to even back up before that, because even at Yahoo before LinkedIn, we were building skill based learning academies even back
Mm-hmm.
then. So, for designers, for example, product designers, and what kind of skills do they need, and what kind of learning would we want to give them to help them get better at their skills, or identify what skills they needed to get better at. So, I think that conversation around skills has been there for a while, yet it really started taking off when we realized how fast the workplace was changing with automation, digitization, and just things were moving so fast. And people were thinking, "Oh my gosh, we need to start thinking about how people can get more skills or develop their skills more quickly than just a college degree." So I'd say that kind of started the conversation. The other thing was around I did some work with the World Economic Forum when I was at Degreed. And of course, the World Economic Forum was trying to lead the skills first. They had Skills Link Alliance, and really were probably at the forefront of getting major organizations, including LinkedIn and Workday and all the major players, to align on how should we be thinking about skills, and how can we be pushing through that. And then, of course, I wrote a book called The Expertise Economy, which was all about the urgent need to upskill the workforce. So, with that as a backdrop, like, where are we? um,
Well, yeah, I feel like in my head, and I have the books actually on my desk here in front of me, but I feel like On the one hand, I want to say so much has changed because it's been 5 years, and how much changes. But then at the same time, not a lot has changed, right? Those two things can be true at the same time
Yeah.
somehow. And I do love that you bring up the LinkedIn thing, because I remember that as a user, and when you start to really think about, oh, this is great. These are things, like, conceptually, it's a good idea that people that I have worked with recognize the things that I'm good at that don't show up somewhere else on some sort of report or in a degree or a diploma or whatever it is. And it leads into this other momentum for the learning world. There's two things at work. I always say companies can't simply hire their way out of a lot of these challenges, right? If you run into these skills problems, you can't simply say, well, we're just going to hire all those people. That's not the answer. It's part of the answer, not the whole answer. And then the other one is, for a lot of these kinds of skills, the way they change so much, you can't send everyone back to college to get them.
Right.
So
Right.
then how do we do this? So yeah, so where are we in this,
Well,
in this time?
and you can look at it from all three of those angles. I mean, I switched to. I'm the chief strategy officer at Southern New Hampshire University, the largest online nonprofit university in the country. And what's interesting about that is that also coincides, but only degrees, right? It's only right now we only offer degrees. Now we're thinking about how to offer more professional skill development in addition to that. And why? It's because for a few years we've been saying, it was kind of a tagline at Degreed, you can't, a college education can no longer take you through the entirety of your career. It's a great baseline, but, if it takes minimum 4 years to get a college degree, and oftentimes for people it's longer than that, by the time you graduate, the skills you might have learned are already obsolete. So how do you, that's a really tough problem, and it's getting tougher, right? Especially now with AI. I mean, have you ever seen things move as fast as they're moving today?
No, I mean, I think that's the nature of things. Is It's always more and faster, always. Whether that's a good thing or not is to be debated, especially
Right.
in terms of AI. But yeah, the speed. I mean, I think about my own, and it's a very long time ago that I went to college. That I worked at companies in my youth where the technology that was at the core of what we did didn't exist when I was in school. So
Right.
how do you prepare yourself for that? Also, things that I learned at school, I spent some time as in audio sound recording technology was my major for a while. That was all analog. It was all 2-inch tape and dials, and very hard to find that now. So even in those small little slices of my life, things
Right.
have changed dramatically. Yeah.
Right. And so you think about, and this is in no way to say that the college degree is not valuable, because I really believe that the college degree is not going away. It's still a very important part of our life, and a lot of people's lives. It's not mandatory for everyone. And I think that there's a few things that are coming together. I mean, not all jobs require a college degree yet. In the past few decades, we've acted like every job does need a college degree. And so now, with people having a hard time trying to find talent, they're realizing, hey, maybe we better rethink that. So maybe college is one path. Maybe there are other paths, and these shorter form certifications and credentials can play a role in that. But I would say, getting back to how fast things are changing, I mean, we're right now building a generative AI certification so people can learn the concepts and actually apply what they're learning to create a real capstone project. And one of the issues, even with that, is it's like this is like we're doing the development now, and even though we developed something 4 weeks ago, it's already changed. Like, luckily, we can go back, and we have an agile development process, and we can go back and make those changes as the field evolves. But that's not true for a college curriculum that is 4 years and can't quite be as agile and change things as quickly. So I think that they're very complementary. If you think about people wanting to get a foundational degree and also doing skill-based learning that complements, based on, what they might not have, that's part of it. The other thing that's happening with skills now, and first of all, I think it's funny that for a few, not long ago, I spoke at the Deloitte CLO conference where I talked about skills being very important, and it wasn't even in the vocabulary yet of all the learning leaders that are CLOs in the industry. It was kind of like early people weren't talking about it yet. Josh Burson was also at that same conference, and people were asking me, like, do you think skills are going to be, like the thing? That wasn't that long ago that we were even questioning whether we should be thinking about learning in terms of skills. Now, what we see is companies making declarations that we're a skills first organization, a skills first hiring. We're going to start changing job descriptions so they're more about skills that you have rather than what degree you have or what experience you've had at other companies. That's a huge change that companies are actually saying, we're hiring for skills first. So that's not that long of a time period yet. There's huge momentum around that. On the flip side, we see I don't know if you've seen these same articles, David, but people saying, companies are saying that they're skills first, yet when we look at the data, hiring managers are still hiring for degrees and recruiters are still hiring for degrees, even if a company says they're skills first. So it hasn't quite caught up yet. I think that it's still a movement. It's still gaining momentum. And I think it will get there, but it takes time for, like, where does the rubber meet the road? It's where hiring managers are actually deciding who they're going to hire. And if they're not thinking about skills, then that's not really going to change. And recruiters too.
Yeah, and it brings me to some harsh realities, I think, sometimes, especially so. Obviously, I look at everything through this learning lens, and you're right. You go to almost any event where learning professionals, learning leaders are, they get it now. They talk about this in this language that we're using, but the processes, the politics, the infrastructure, everything that is already in place is not designed for any of this. Both
right.
in a university setting, it's there, I think, and you know better than I, but I think they're getting better at that. They're trying to adjust to the modern, because they're dealing with, by and large, the younger generations. But organizations themselves and then learning functions, they're, all this all sounds great, but nothing we have in place is prepared to do any of this. And so it becomes this unscalable mountain where it's like, well, it's just easier to keep doing it the way we do it, and hopefully it'll work. You talk about hiring managers. They are very set in their processes and the way they do things. And I look at a thing like a degree. You mentioned how, is it important? Is it not? But people still use them. It's sort of a default position, right? It's like, it's just, I need a baseline. I need to start somewhere. This person hasn't worked here. I don't have any history. I don't know. But if I have this, I can go somewhere. So it just becomes this default position, and then we'll figure out the rest later. And we just have to blow it all up. And it's going to take a lot of work, and it'll take time. And this isn't, disparagement. It's just everyone's sort of afraid to blow things up for so many reasons.
Right.
But to do the kinds of things that you're talking about, it really takes a very big shift, right? You can't just sort of ease your way into it.
It's true. And, one of the things that I was so excited about coming to higher ed was to say, I've always seen that there's kind of a gap between what higher ed is doing and what companies are doing, and how they actually talk to each other and make sure that what employers need and universities are understanding. But what I've learned is that there's still a communication gap. We're not using the same language as we're talking about things. For example, universities are very excited about competency-based learning, and they're not using the word skills instead. And so and then if we talk about what's a competency versus a skill, there's a big debate around that. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting is that when was it that there was the badge craze in the
Oh,
workforce? I mean, was
yeah,
it
not
10
too long
years,
ago.
10, 5 years? How long ago? I don't know.
Yeah, somewhere between 5 and 10.
Yeah. So I feel like badges haven't been as popular in the workforce as maybe people would have liked them to be. I don't know what your opinion is on that, but I don't think internally, like I've seen the most successful programs be internal. You know, if we're doing an internal program, like for a sales organization, and we give them a badge, if they do that, it means something to the leadership there. But for an average hiring manager or recruiter to see a badge in order to hire somebody, or a badge that's not from their organization, people don't know what that means.
Yeah,
So universities are still thinking badges are the thing. And I'm thinking, in the workforce, that's not really how people are thinking about the best way to credential people. So
yeah.
that's another interesting
It
point.
is because you're right. There was that time period where everyone thought they were going to be transferable and universal, and take these badges everywhere you go, and they just don't translate because it's such a unique thing to each organization about what gets you the badge. What does that badge mean? And so what happened is they sort of devolved into internal engagement motivators, sort of,
Yep.
and not any more representative of a particular skill to say that I am a master or I am competent or whatever at this particular thing. It's like I finished, I got to a place and I got this thing. And so the true value of whatever that badge represented, not that I'm demeaning in the engagement and the motivation that they represent
Right.
when used specifically for that purpose, but they've
Right.
lost sort of that original purpose, which was, like you say, that shows your skill.
Right. And so I think that to me, the main thing that we should be thinking about when we think about skills is what is the goal? What do we actually want to accomplish? Like, why are we even talking about skills and a skills first environment? And I believe it's because, as we mentioned, things are changing so fast. But how can we break things up into smaller ways, that are shorter than a college degree, even shorter than a boot camp, which was another kind of phase that we were going through, mostly a year long. But the goal is to see if somebody knows something and can do something with what they know. That's what we're all trying. Like, I think that when I learn a skill, that's what I want to know. I often think about Italian. I've been studying Italian for years. I'm always trying to get better. But if you think about it, if I just read about the Italian language, or and I don't practice it, and I don't actually speak Italian, and if somebody gives me feedback on how I'm doing, that's how I learn best. I reflect, and this is part of the expertise economy too, where we talk about the learning loop. You need to have the ideas, you need to practice, you need to get feedback, and you need to reflect. When we think about skills-based learning, we need to go through that whole learning loop. And where we often fall short is that people think learning is just giving people information and taking tests around that in higher ed, and in the workforce, it's just like giving people information. I mean, and then there's no test. But I think we need to get back to the core fundamental issue of learning. We want to make sure people are learning, they can actually do something with what they know, but then also make it so that employers recognize that, oh, you spent all this money on teaching people skills. Can they actually do something with what they know? And I've somehow forgotten that that's the main role of learning,
Yeah.
whether it's in higher education or in a corporate setting. So I think that's where the skills movement needs to go. And I don't think we're there yet. But I think we'll get there.
Yeah, and it's clearly a journey, right? It's not going to be tomorrow. And I think you and I right now are a great representative microcosm of your of the principles you're talking about, because you spoke about Italian and you're learning Italian. You live in Italy at least all the time, part of the time. I
And
mean, so you are immersed. You are in that feedback loop because living your daily life, you're getting that. I, on the other hand, according to the University of Massachusetts, have a conversational level of Spanish.
right,
because I went to class and I passed,
Right.
and it showed up on my transcript. I can barely get out a word or two. I probably understand it a little better, but by no means am I conversational in Spanish. But that's the difference, right? Is here's the stuff, take the test, good luck to you. Whereas you are invested in this and you're living it and you're constantly working on it in a real world environment.
Right. And so I would say then you take something like, I'll take generative AI because it's the hot topic these days. I mean, you can watch a video or you can take a class where somebody's lecturing to you about what is generative AI. Here's the tools. But can you actually use the tools and show people and demonstrate how you're using the tools to actually create something that's that's useful and meaningful? And it's the same process of learning that you're going through. You can't stop just with the information part. You've got to keep going and use it and demonstrate your skills, or else and that, to me, that's the beauty, the promise of skills-based learning, is that you're actually going to be able to do something, and we're going to give you feedback about whether what you've done is good or not. Sports is another great, or music is another great analogy for learning when we put it in that context, because we've all had, coaches or experiences where we're trying to learn something, but you have to practice and you have to get feedback. And we often don't incorporate that into our learning. So I'd love to see that be part of the skills first movement.
Yeah, I mean, the music analogy, and I use it a lot. Obviously, it's my life, and I've gone to learn other people's songs, a cover song. And these are songs I've probably heard my whole life, from since I was a kid, and I've listened to them my whole life. But if I sat down to play it, I wouldn't be able to play it right away with a group. I'd have to practice the actual physical act of playing it. So I think this gets into something that we had talked about earlier that I want to bring up, and I think you just highlighted it, is this idea that there's probably too much passive learning that goes on, right? And we go back to when I was mentioning that all the infrastructure and everything's built around this certain idea of how people learn. And over years, it's the core of that has been a majority of passive learning. So that what we're saying is, if that's the approach, then the skills thing isn't going to happen, because that won't happen in that environment. So what can we do to shift that? One question. Another question, you can handle these however you like. Having seen both sides of the coin, do you think higher ed is on a faster trajectory of getting away from passive learning? Because I feel like when people think about it, they imagine college, lecture hall, 100 students getting stuff shoved in their face, and that's the end of it. And then they tend to think of themselves in their company that, we're a little bit more, we are more active. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it really depends. I mean, in doing research for the book and then actually living the higher ed world for a while, I feel like it varies a lot. There are a couple of universities that are doing a really great job with certain programs where it's very practical, hands-on. They're really doing a good job with that. Just like there are a few companies that I think I always highlight that are doing a great job with really. It's not like no one's doing this. It's like there's a few forward-thinking companies that are really doing a fantastic job with that. In fact, they're taking, this old idea of the flipped classroom and saying, look, passive learning plays a role in what we're doing. And what I mean by that is, the flipped classroom model was always, let's not spend our time when we're together lecturing or getting the basic concepts. So think about a lot of the learning videos that are out there, or whatever artifacts you use to get the basic ideas. That's great. You still need that in some form. Maybe you don't need it in a live lecture because knowledge is abundant now. There's so much information out there. It's almost overwhelming. So you can use that as part of it, but then you can't, again, don't stop there. Then it's like build your skill-based learning as with that as a core. Now you've learned the concepts. Okay, now let's practice doing something with that and go through that loop. You can get feedback and then you can reflect and keep going. It's a simple loop. It's very foundational, yet I think ever since I've been in the learning industry, it's more about delivering the learning. It's like delivering has been the goal, yet we're not as diligent about the evaluation of
Yeah,
of all of that. It's a lot. It takes
it's a lot of work.
some. It's a lot of work. It's a lot
I,
of work to do that. Not saying that some people aren't doing that. So
of
both.
course,
So I think your question is who's further ahead? Is it higher ed or is it companies? And I would say it's hard to put them in those categories because I think there's standout, forward thinking people in both places that are doing more innovative things. The thing where I think we get caught up is, and a lot of, when skills based learning first hit the corporate learning world, I think what people were thinking about is skills taxonomies and right. I mean, and really focusing on, okay, well, there's thousands of skills out there. How are we going to make sure that people understand all the skills that are out there, and then how are we going to tie all the learning to all of these skills? And I think that's a tough way to approach things, just because it will never a project like that will never complete. You'll never finish it. And for people who have been in worlds where you've had to develop competency models in the past, same thing. It's like competency models would take years to develop and they would be outdated before they were even finished because things are constantly changing. So I've often taken the approach, and I always take a more like simple is better, where you don't necessarily need a skills taxonomy to be successful in a skills first kind of initiative or frame of mind. Even is like, if you understand, I mean, we can all look at it out there. What are the skills most in demand for the future of work now and for the future of work? Identify what some of those are, and then you need to understand what skills people have and where is that gap. Pick a few things. You don't need to boil the ocean. You don't need to have a whole taxonomy before you even get to actually teaching people new skills, because I don't think we'll make much progress if we approach
no.
it that way.
Yeah, you can't take that moment in time snapshot that companies want. They want this list, and I've said this in other venues, but it's more important to have an apparatus that allows you to build the skills you need, whatever they are, right?
Right.
So that when you determine suddenly being able to be good at generative AI prompts, was that a skill that was on someone's radar 2 years ago? Probably not.
No.
So now all of a sudden that's shown up on your radar. Okay, you say, I've identified this skill. Now let's figure out how if you're starting every single time from scratch, every time you identify a new skill, you'll never get there. It's more about how do we build these skills as we identify them. Sure, there's going to be a core. You're right. And you're right. Simplicity. I've talked to so many companies that have gone from hundreds and hundreds of skills and sub items and condense those. That's a place where, and I'm Mr. Pump the brakes on AI because it's everywhere and doesn't need to be at the moment. But I think that's an area where that can help, because that's a place where human effort, it's a little overwhelming to sort of make sense of all the skills and the attributes and what learning builds those skills and what they're applied. AI can help make sense of that, I think, especially over time. It's going to get better and better. And then we'll help you build a model that can identify what's coming and how to approach it as it evolves. So I do think there's a lot of potential there for AI to do some real work, because we are very fixated. People love lists. They want to have a thing. They want to have a list of things that they can. We did that one. We did that one.
Right. And I think it's one example I like to give, talk about simplicity, is there's this one consulting company that realized a few years ago, like, we are getting asked for data science skills, and we don't have enough people with these data science skills at all, let alone today or not today, let alone for the future. So they put together an initiative basically saying we're going to upskill a quarter of our workforce in data science skills because we're not, everybody else is competing for that talent out there. So we're not going to be able to buy, to your earlier point, we're not going to be able to hire our way out of this problem. We're going to have to build these skills. But think about how simple that is, like identifying a business need and just thinking about that one area that's so crucial to the success of a business. Sure, it's a simple example, but I'm telling you that actually was very effective. And there was another company that said, okay, we're just going to, in fact, I just talked to this former CLO earlier today. We talked about how to come up with a simple strategy for just 3 skills in each functional area. Your finance, what are those 3 skills that are most important there? Talk about HR, talk about engineering, just identify 3 to 5 skills in those areas, and then measure your progress against how many people are actually gaining those skills once you figure that out. I know it sounds so simple, but it can be effective because then you can measure it. You can actually report out on it to the company CEO and the business leaders, and people are all feeling like, wow, we're actually making progress.
Right. I mean, it goes back to your thing about only measuring delivery. If you're actively identifying what skills you need and are they missing? Okay, so whatever criteria you're using, you've already got your measurement, you're building your measurement criteria already, right? You recognize that this is missing. Okay, what does it look like when it's not missing? And so let's see if we can actually make that happen. But we get very focused on, okay, this is missing, let's build it. And because we're all super smart and really good at what we do, we're going to build this learning program that's awesome and we're going to roll it out. And as long as everyone finished it, we fixed it. We did it. Yep. But it's like, if you put all that effort up front, you've already done most of the work that's required to measure the stuff we're talking about.
Right. I wanted to bring up another point about AI in the world. I mean, as we're seeing it, it is causing us to rethink different jobs and what parts of those jobs can be done by AI and what parts of those jobs can be done by humans, which again really impacts a skills strategy. Because if you think about what skills do we need for the future of work versus what are people doing today? I think that is not a doom and gloom scenario. I think it's actually really great. Like, think about all the boring parts of your job that you don't want to do that AI could do, and then maybe you get to do higher value work. But the other thing that I think is probably more important than that, it's like the most important skills for the future of work are human skills. And you marry the AI, basic AI skills with human skills. Like, let's us get better at human skills so that because that's going to be most important, especially as we think about the human connection, even in learning, right? If you think about learning and how crucial a role humans play in that, even if things are online, having a human coach that is being able to give you feedback, even if it's asynchronously, is a lot more valuable than an AI bot. Right. So, I mean, I just think about it in those simplest terms. I think that's kind of the direction we're going to be going. And I'm kind of excited to see, where it's all headed. Oh, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. You're right. The more technologically connected we are, the more disconnected, right, we become, and we all live that through the pandemic, and we're trying to get back to some new third thing, like that's not like the way it was before. And I do think you're right that it has much heightened and elevated these interpersonal skills, these human skills. I think that's a whole new skill set, like you just described, the ability to make a connection and be connected to somebody virtually. That's something people didn't have to have before. And it is a very unique and difficult skill. I think a lot of managers found that out the hard way when they couldn't just pop their head into an office and say, "How you doing? Everything good? Okay." Yeah. Suddenly the people weren't in that office anymore, and they actually had to do something meaningful. So yes, I think there's a plus. I think, if you as a person are in jeopardy of losing your entire livelihood or meaning over AI, maybe you probably focus on the wrong things in the first place. I don't want to be too general because there's obviously every situation, there's something unique, but I think you're right in the long run. I do want to believe that it's supposed to allow us to do more things. My problem is I always look at the history and like you'll go back over time and how technology since the beginning of time has always been supposed to save us energy and allowed us to do more strategic things and be more
Right.
leisurely even. And none of that has happened.
Right.
So,
And that promise has failed us, in every case. We just have to work more. It's interesting because I don't think ever in our history have we seen, I mean, probably since the Industrial Revolution, have we seen so much change in how we work and how it's still evolving, how companies can't decide, whether it's okay if people work remote or a hybrid model or make everybody come back to the office. I mean, that's a fundamental philosophy about how we do work and where
mhm.
is work what you do or is it a place you go to. We're still having that debate, which does also tie into our skills conversation, because if you think about how you have to have different skills if you're not together in an office. And
Mhm.
I think that's what you were kind of implying too. And are you able to be flexible and adaptable and change with that, with the way that's going? I think those are the keys, right? Being flexible and adaptable. I love Microsoft has got actually a great philosophy on the remote work or the work policy, which is we try to be as flexible as possible. And they don't have a one size fits all policy for all their employees because they can't.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. And I think if more people would adopt that, I think we'd quit having so many debates about it.
Mhm.
Probably.
So one of the last things I want to touch on, because you've got this unique perspective, is you talk about we go back to the beginning where we say, well, there's the sort of foundational thing, the degree, right? There's this thing, and then there's your work life, and then there's this space in between those things where there's all these missing pieces. Um, in talking to you, offline, you are working, with SNHU to sort of figure out maybe higher ed can take on some of that burden, right? It's been always a burden on the workplace. You get to your
Right.
job and like, well, we're going to teach you how to have a job, how to do these things and get these skills. But you're realizing that maybe the gap's so big that we could probably on the higher ed side take some of that burden and try to give people more of that stuff. Is that what you guys are doing? Did I describe it well or?
Yes, you described it very well, and I think that's. I mean, if you, I'm reading different blogs and newsletters now than in addition to what I've always read. But inside higher ed and all of these things that talk about trends that are going on in higher ed and in universities, and I think everybody's real. There's two things. There's two common themes that are happening. It's like people are questioning the value of a degree, and um, and what are the alternatives, um, and I think that there's a lot of thought going into that, and people realizing that if that again, just like the workplace, if universities don't think about changing, um, they're seeing, we're seeing not at SNHU because we're online and we're targeting a different demographic, working adults who are may not have had the opportunity to get a college education before. It's like we're serving that not new high school grads, and
Right.
that although there are some of those there, um, that's a change. I don't know if you know how hard it is for universities to even go online. That was a big thing, and now the conversation is, well, skills and shorter form credentials of some sort are we're going to have to figure out how to do that, because it's just what the world is demanding right now, given all the trends that are going on. So we are definitely seeing an opportunity to move into that space. In addition, again, I'll say it again, the degrees are still important. They're not going away. But what can we do to give people alternatives to helping, in addition to your degree, if your degree was 10 or 20 years ago, like a lot of us, how do we continue to upskill and get better at what we do, either get better at our jobs or get ready for the job that's next in our future. And so I think that we're focusing on that and how we can help, in addition to our degrees, help people get shorter form real learning, not passive learning, but real learning. And so that's exciting. I'm really excited. I mean, it kind of is the trajectory of my career where it led me to this place, that it kind of is everything I've been working on since I started in corporate learning, that this is where we, wanted to be. So.
That's awesome. I love it. And so on that note of mentioning the future and preparing people for the future, it is time for a segment that I do on predictions. And normally I would ask my guest to choose from three options: a prediction that should have come true already. We can talk about whether or not it did. A prediction that is yet to come true. We can talk about whether or not it will. Or you can make your own prediction. But because I have you and I'm holding, for those who can't see, I'm holding your book. In this book, I know that there are several predictions. Book isn't that old, but still, I would like to know if there's any predictions in here that you'd like to revisit in this time.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that that may not seem as controversial today as it did when I was writing the book is that I actually had the pleasure of interviewing the late Clayton Christensen, the Harvard University professor who's famous for disruptive technologies. Mm-hmm. And he had a prediction that was very controversial in the higher ed space, saying that 50% of all universities would be going out of business within the next 10 years because of online education. And really, I mean, people in general, not even just in higher ed, but I think the general population thought that that was a crazy prediction, saying, no, there's no way that, universities have been there for a long time and online still is kind of a fad. And how is this going to happen? But we're seeing it. I mean, since I've been at SNHU about a year and a half now, and every week we see announcements of one college or another closing. Now, okay, the Ivy League schools, the big universities are not going anywhere, just to be really clear. They're solid. But if you think about how many colleges and universities there are in the U.S., there's a lot. I mean, thousands. And so we are seeing, declining enrollment, and a lot of the smaller schools just can't compete. And so I would say that, to your prediction, I'd say it's coming true. I don't think it's 50% yet, but it's on that trajectory. And now with COVID, it changed everything about online, learning, that we saw that people could, people prefer online learning in many cases to in person because of, the commute. You have to go to the classroom and all of that. It's just the flexibility with the kind of world that we live in today. And a lot of universities weren't really equipped to do online learning well. So now we're seeing that trend of more universities trying to put more stuff online, and we're seeing a lot of smaller schools closing. So I don't necessarily think, again, I'm not a doom and gloom person. This isn't a doom and gloom scenario. I don't think. I think it's just the adjusting and adapting to the world that we live in. It can't stay the same.
Precisely. I mean, it goes back to, I think it's indicative of what you were talking about, is that, so if you move beyond the Ivy Leagues, the institutions, the universities that people all know by name, right? You move beyond that and you get into some of these smaller colleges, then it becomes, well, if you're not providing that name and that background, what are you providing? Like, what is a graduate and with whatever degree they're getting, what is the value there now, right? And that I think has changed because
Right.
of all the things that we've talked about. That it doesn't necessarily represent the skills it's going to require to be successful. So yeah, I think that might be just the natural progression of things. So
And it's so expensive. We know that how expensive it is, and how the ROI on a college education used to be pretty clear, and now it's not as
no,
clear. And so people have to, have to think about that, given where we're at.
yeah,
But the alternatives are exciting. I think with what we can. I mean, think about, so Clayton Christensen wrote The Innovator's Dilemma, and we're kind of in the innovator's dilemma, right? Always with AI and the way the world is changing, the way learning is changing. And I think for us to keep an open mind about the possibilities for the future, and to think about things differently, rethink, as Adam Grant would always say, rethink some of our old ideas about how things have always been done or how they should be done. I think that the future is pretty exciting and pretty bright to think about new ways of doing things.
I love to end on that things are bright, because sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But I think you're right that change can be hard, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I think a lot, if you get a hold of things, change can definitely be good. And I think this is one of those changes where you got to get on the ride, because it's it's happening whether you want it to or not.
Right.
So Kelly, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Thanks, David.
And
Always great to talk to you.
yeah, I feel a little sad that we don't run necessarily in the exact same circles. So I don't run into you annually like I maybe used to. Hopefully, I'll see you at something in the near future. But I thanks for really digging into a new side of the skills discussion. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.